Hi everybody, Shalom Aleichem, Shvuah Tov. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's not so easy. I heard that all of the Avos Ubanim programs began this week, so a bit of a monkey wrench. But just before we get started, to introduce myself, my name is Adam Tsianov, and I am actually the Jewish liaison for the 24th, for District 24, Queens Community Council, under Councilman Rory Lansman. I worked a very long time to put this together. And it's OHEL working together with the ABA, the Alliance of Bahrain Americans, and also Chazaq as well. And we have a very special program here tonight. And just to get it started, I did want to invite up here Mr. David Mendel, who is the COO of OHEL, to give a few words.
Thank you very much, Adam. Shavua Tov and B'chvod. Have a bonim, and welcome everyone this evening. It's a pleasure to participate and to join with the organizations, with Emet and Chazaq and the Bahrain community to share some thoughts with you. I often say that there isn't anyone that goes through life without some type of a challenge. We will all experience, or we all do experience, or we have experienced a situation that challenges us, whether it's with a family member, ourselves, a neighbor, and we need to know how to ask for help, and we need to know when to ask for help, and we need to know where to ask for help. So coming out this evening and joining and having the opportunity to speak and to strengthen ourselves is very good. My colleagues, Tzivi Vaido and Heather Gray, who organized this evening, and Dr. Norman Blumenthal, who's sharing some thoughts with you. OHEL is looking forward to continuing to build a partnership with the community, not only this evening, but for years coming forward. And we hope that from this evening, you not only learn about the work that OHEL does, but in whatever way we can continue to support in the schools, in the synagogues, in your homes, we will be there with you in every way that we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. I'd next like to invite Dr. Norman Blumenthal, who's a licensed clinical psychologist in New York, who received his doctorate from Adelphi University with over 20 years' experience in trauma and bereavement services. He currently serves as the Zachter Family Director of Trauma and Crisis Intervention for All Children Home and Family Services, and he's also an adjunct professor at the Furkhoff Graduate School of Psychology, both of Yeshiva University. Dr. Blumenthal and his team regularly address the survivors of trauma, including Hurricane Sandy, Houston floods, Pittsburgh shooting, and California forest fires. Dr. Blumenthal also lectures frequently on mental health issues, including anxiety, technology, and suicide prevention. In addition, Dr. Blumenthal is a consultant for the Tova mentoring program in Cedar Hills, New York.
Okay, thank you. Oops. Okay, thank you very much, Adam, and that was a very nice introduction. About 10% of it is true. But it is really a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward, in particular, to the panel that's going to follow my presentation with experts, and I think that's when we're going to really get down to some of the nitty-gritty, and I know that I always learn from that, from hearing from colleagues, and hopefully we'll all be enriched. And I also want to commend Chazaq and the Bahrain community, and Emet, and all those who co-sponsored this event and making this shidduch between OHEL and this community. I want you to know that I think OHEL is one of the best kept secrets in the Jewish community. Even when I joined OHEL about 7 years ago, and I'd already been in the field about 30 years, I really had no idea the breadth and scope of the services that OHEL provides. David very wisely, my first 2 weeks, told me I'm a tourist and had me tour all the different programs. I didn't come home with many picture postcards or coffee mugs, but I really got a sense, and I think you'll come to appreciate, as we collaborate more and more, the enormous work that OHEL does in many areas, and particularly in terms of mental health. When I'm thinking about this topic, and what my focus will be for the next 20-25 minutes, I'm reminded of a story I heard from a friend of mine, a friend of ours, my wife's here, so also a friend of ours, who had a sort of life child, had a child after his many years, and the child was sort of much younger than his siblings. And he came home one night. He was at that time, maybe middle school, maybe early high school, and he had a science test, and he was going on and how difficult the science test and what a horrible test it was and how difficult it was. And finally, one of his older siblings asked him, what was the test on? And he said, paper. That's children today. It's not taken for granted that something, a test or anything that you communicate, will be on paper. So that's what we're going to try. I'm going to try to focus on is the enormous way, the apocalyptic way, in which technology has changed our world and has changed our children. Now, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, this is not going to be a hand-wringing kind of speech. I don't give those kind of speeches. I'm not going to stand here and talk about the good old days when we used to write letters and we used to read maps and there were only 7 TV channels and they were all black and white. I'm not that kind of person. I believe that life progresses and life changes and we have to adjust to it. I often like to quote the great theologian and philosopher Wayne Gretzky. I'm sure you've all heard of him. Who used to say that I skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's been. And our success is to skate to where life is going, where life is heading. And that's what I want very much to be our focus, because I think sometimes when people get up and talk about technology and the internet, etc., they bemoan it, they go on and on, how terrible it is, how terribly destructive it is, and in some respects it is risky. I'm not going to say destructive. But it's here to stay. It's part of the world. It's very interesting historically, as I think in terms of the response of, let's say, the Torah community, the Haredi community, to the internet when it first came out. Many more years ago, when television became very popular, the more yeshivish community, the Haredi community, rejected TV, basically. There were all those jokes about how the television in the closet and things like that. But for the most part, it became mainstream in that community not to have a television. And people were saying, that's ridiculous, how can you not have a TV? It's so much a part of culture, etc. And they proved that, yes, you can develop and nurture a very successful community, a very enterprising and wide community without the Three Stooges and without I Love Lucy. They did it. So they came with the same approach when the internet came out. They said, no, it's asur. We can't have it. But they realized soon you can't do that because it's so much a part of our life. Technology is so much a part of life. You can't have this kind of blanket forbidding, a blanket exclusion from it. So we have to now sort of make our peace with it. Now, another thing that's very important to keep in mind, and it's often talked about in terms of natives and immigrants, which is the generational schism that exists today between adults and children, very much centering around technology and very much centering around social media. So let me share something personal. I grew up not far from here. And in fact, when I was 3 years old, and my parents moved from Brooklyn to Forest Hills, they were building the Queens Jewish Center. They were still davening in a storefront on 99th Street, but they already started the building. And I davened 2 blocks down here at the Queens Jewish Center. Almost all of our parents were immigrants, many of them, like my mother, a Holocaust survivor. And there was a real generational schism between us and them. I had one friend who had American-born parents, and he once asked them how come they don't speak English like his friend's parents. They're the only ones who didn't have an accent. So we were much more well-versed in America and the working America, in English, etc. They have a lot of hysterical stories, if sometimes you want to hear them, about situations we had when we used to ask our immigrant parents to take us to baseball games and what kind of things happened. But they also had some distance from America. And they also had some wisdom from their experiences. And that's what I say when I speak to the kids, and I just did the other day. When I speak to 13, 14-year-olds about technology, I put it right out there on the table. And I say to them, you know more about it than I do. You're much more at home. And there might be a new app that just came out this past week that I'll find out about in about 8 weeks, and by the time I find out about it, you're on a newer one. So it's, in a way, a chutzpah for me to be up here and addressing you. But you know something? Some distance from it is helpful too. So I can give you some advice from the perspective of someone who didn't grow up with it, who may not know it as well as you do. And this can be a partnership, because you can share with me what you're doing and what effect it has, and I can give you that perspective. But the changes are huge. I'm just going to go over some just general areas. Let's show you the extent to which the world has changed because of technology. Then I'll focus on what really should be our focus today, which is family relationships and communication. Okay, first of all, disrespect. Everyone will tell you, children are chutzpahdik today. Children don't have the same regard for authority than they did in the past. We hear this all the time. We hear this at OHIL when we're doing teacher workshops or when we're doing parenting programs. My father just had to give me a look and I shuddered. Today, kids are not scared of us. Why? What has changed? Is it because we're lousy parents? And the answer is partly technology. Because it used to be that children needed adults to navigate them through this very complicated world. Certainly I can remember that if I heard something or somebody said something, somebody did something, I had to ask my parents. And my parents were the ones who gave me that information, who, as I said, helped me through the world. So I was very dependent on them. Today, a child doesn't need parents. Because anything they want to find out, they can find out with the click of a mouse. And, as I mentioned earlier, this very important device, or this collection of devices, they know better than we do. I have, sometimes when I present more formally, I have a PowerPoint, and I have one delicious PowerPoint. It shows very concerned parents sort of hovering over a little child, the father sitting next to the kid, and the mother standing there looking very worried, and there's a computer in the background. And the father saying to the child, you have to try very, very hard to remember exactly where you transferred all of mommy's and daddy's assets. But that's what it's like. They have to just totally at world. So they're not as respectful. So it has impacted on that relationship. It's the helicopter parent, okay? We all talk today about the helicopter parent. The parent wants to know every second what's going on with a child. Why is that so today? Did we as parents, or for guys my age who are grandparents already, or were our parents any less loving or concerned? But you know why you have helicopter parents today? Because you didn't have the technology back then. I remember, you went to camp, and your parents sent you to camp, and they hope you came back with all of your limbs. There was no, they send you letters. I remember they wouldn't let you into the lunchroom unless you had a letter. So we used to just take blank piece of paper, put it in the envelope, and send it off to parents. There were now with emails and with nanny cams and with and with faxes and with so there is that natural expectation that you're going to know everything about you. I'm going to mention later. I'm going to talk a little bit when I have some time. Talk about apps where we can monitor our children. There's one app that will let you know if your child is driving more than 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. It's to that extent that we can, which is a great thing, but it's but it's still, it shows the extent that we can have that monitoring. So now we have helicopter parents who are so anxious and schools will tell you. I had a principal of a school tell me that she gets phone calls on Wednesday from parents. Could you please make sure my child has a play date in Shabbat? I'm a principal of a school. But that kind of hovering is a result of technology. Another area, which very much affects the work we do at OHIL, finding out, knowing information. Again, as I mentioned earlier, parents used to be the filters. Parents used to be the gatekeepers of what children know and don't know. And there was a sort of unspoken agreement between children and adults, that's probably the way most of our lives were, that there's some very complicated, confusing things going on in the adult world, and I don't know about it, I don't want to know about it. I often talk, so I grew up here, I just mentioned, I grew up on 63rd Road off of Yellowstone. It was a very busy street. It used to be a two-way street, now it's a one-way street. Now it was a Friday afternoon, I was, I think, about 5 years old, and it was a regular Friday afternoon in the Blumenthal household. My mother was making Shabbos, and I was fighting with my sister, and suddenly they hear screeching brakes, and crash of metal. It sounded like a terrible accident. And I remember my mother threw off her apron, went running to the door, and I went running after her. And she turned around and very sternly said to me, "Now you stay inside." And I remember, because I remember how relieved I was that I won't have to see what's going on out there. What would happen today? They go anyway. Why? Because children don't rely on parents anymore for information. They can find out everything, so they feel entitled to know. And I have to tell you, we're focusing on the crisis team here. I, and together with Sivi over here, we direct a crisis team, a team of 20 trained mental health professionals who have to go, hopefully we would like to go out of business, but have to go to homes when there's a sudden death, when there's a vehicular accident, situations like this. And there are times that things happen, I'll leave it to your imagination, that I don't want young children to know yet. I think they're too young to process it, but I have to tell them because they're going to find out anyway, because they're going to Google it. They're going to find out anyway. So we find ourselves in the situation of having to inform children about things that we wished they didn't have to know. But that's the world we live in, because they're going to find out anyway. So I'd rather they find out from me. This was the big question, if you remember. This goes back quite a few years already. But after the murder of Libby Kletsky, I'm sure probably never know that I've forgotten that. The most common question we got asked was, I understand that I have to tell my child that he was murdered because he was missing, everybody was looking for him. I have to tell my child, I understand, tell my child that the perpetrator is a member of our community. Do I have to tell my child that he was dismembered? It's so gross, it's so scary. Does he have to know that? So I created a mythical character. I call him the big stupid kid on the bus. Every bus has them. It's part of your tuition. Check your tuition. You pay for a bus, a driver, and a big stupid kid. Because every single bus has them. I know them well because I raised two of them. I know them very well. And the big stupid kid on the bus is the kid who tells everybody in the bus anything he hears about. And I say to them, if he's going to hear about this terrible tragedy, I'd rather he hears it from you than from the big stupid kid on the bus, because children hear everything. And one of the outcomes of this, and again, just to show you the breadth of how technology has changed things, is that we're seeing unprecedented levels of anxiety among children. OL is currently running a number of programs. Mayor Mark is here, who runs our school-based program, a number of programs in schools to help children deal with anxiety. Because there's more anxiety today among children, and we have data to prove that, than there was during the Great Depression, during World War II, during the Cold War, during the Vietnam era. And yet we're living in pretty good times. We're living in pretty safe times. Why are children so anxious? Now, again, there could be a host of reasons. One of them is because they're finding out everything. Then there's no naivete of childhood anymore. Everything's out there. Any news item is right away seen, and seen graphically. So therefore, there's a whole lot more anxiety. The other reason, also again related to technology, is they're so used to everything being so tailored to them, everything coming to them so directly and quickly in such an immediate way with no effort, that when they have a struggle, when they have something they have to deal with, they're facing tremendous anxiety. So again, it comes all back to technology, and then we're doing today anxiety programs in schools. And by the way, that touches on another very interesting issue, which is the whole role of the teacher has changed. So when we go into a school, as we have in a number of schools, and we're developing an anxiety program, and especially from the older teachers, they'll come to us. The old team is doing a program. We do groups, and we're doing all sorts of things. And they come to us and they say, since when am I a therapist? Why am I busy with children's anxiety? I'm here to teach math. I'm here to teach history. I'm here to teach Chumash. I'm here to teach Gemara. Why am I busy with the child's anxiety? A kid has anxiety, I'll send him to the therapist. But the role of the teacher is changing. Because it used to be the role of the teacher was to impart information, to give information to the children. We don't need teachers for that. Because again, they can click a mouse and they can find out more than the teacher knows. Similar things, by the way, going on. Just to show you again how things have changed. The physician-patient relationships have changed. Because it used to be that if you had a condition, of course, if you're Jewish, you went to the biggest specialist, right? The old Jackie Mason routine. This guy's so specialized, nobody's ever seen him. You go to the biggest specialist, and whatever he says, you got to listen to him. Somebody could have, Rahmana Litzlan, a rare disease that there are only 6 cases in the whole world, and they can Google it and find out more information than the doctor knows. So it's no longer, so patients are walking into the physician's office and they're saying, why aren't you doing what they're doing in Texas? Or how about that new technique in Japan? So it's changed that whole relationship. But again, to get back to teachers. So teachers' jobs are no longer just to give over information. We don't need them for that. So teachers are more and more becoming sort of deputized therapists. And they're dealing with emotional issues, with therapy-like issues, with anxiety, with depression, with loss. They're becoming our deputies because their role has changed because we don't need teachers for information. Even shidduchim, and I don't like to mention shidduchim, I often say I didn't learn enough mental illness to understand shidduchim. But the whole shidduch process changed again, partly because of technology. What do I mean? Is that it used to be that if there was information about the potential spouse, you learned about it in an interpersonal context. You learned about it while dating. This information would come out, and you would hear it from the person whom the information is affected. So when, that brother of yours that, who's you don't want to talk about because he's whatever, I don't want to say anything, But, it would come out in the context relationship. Today, with profiles and with resumes and with information accessible through Facebook and other information, people are finding out information about the potential mate before they even met them. So it's in a depersonalized setting. And that has changed the whole process and the emphases in dating as well. So or let's even take one more point that has changed so dramatically, and that's politically. It used to be that there were a handful of channels, there were a handful of newspapers, and the newspapers felt a sort of obligation. They might have a sort of bent, but to present many sides to an issue. Today, we get our news online, and the news becomes tailored to your interests. So if you're a progressive, all the news that's going to hit you is going to be all the news that's very much along the lines of the progressives. And if you're a conservative, then all the news that's going to come to you is from a conservative perspective. And then we have, if you look at what's going on in the polarization in this country in terms of viewpoints, it's partly, again, technology, because technology is shaping us and changing us in such dramatic ways. And then, of course, there's the issue that we're going to be focusing on tonight, which is interpersonal relationships and family relationships. The technology has changed the manner and fashion, both in which the way in which we communicate and how much we communicate. And again, I just want to mention, I'm not a hand-wringer. We're not going to be talking about, again, get rid of it, whatever. We have to sort of adapt to it. And again, the theme, if you're the type of person who is reading a whodunit and reads the last page first to see who actually, that the butler did the murder or something like that, I'll give you the conclusion. The conclusion is, our goal tonight is not to get rid of the internet. Our goal tonight is not to turn the clock back. Our goal tonight is to take this very important, highly valuable devices and means and have governorship over it. We have to own it instead of it owning us. We have to be in control of it instead of it governing over us. But one of the very big problems is, of course, connection, how we connect with other people. And I can't emphasize how important that is. Let me hark back to a study that was done, it's almost already about 20 years ago. Psychologists woke up one day and said, for years and years, we've been studying why people are sad, why people are depressed. Let's figure out why people are happy. So they did this huge international study, very large number of subjects all around the world, to find out what makes people happy. They couldn't say happy because that doesn't sound scientific. So they called it SWB, subjective well-being. Happiness. And they found 3 things that are associated with happiness, all of which begin with the letter F, the 3 Fs. Go for it. What are the 3 Fs that make people happy? So let's have a little anyone guess?
Family.
Huh?
Family with family.
Food. Family, yeah. Food, no, only Jews and Italians, yeah.
Fun.
Fun, nope. Friends. Family, friends, nobody gets the 3rd, I love it.
Facebook.
Facebook, right, very good. No. Okay, faith. But how do you measure faith? You can't measure you measure faith by membership in a house of worship. So if you're a member of a shul, if you're a member of a church or a mosque, then that was faith. Now, as we used to say in yeshiva, what's the tzad hashava b'neihem? What's the common denominator? Families, friends, membership in a communal house of worship. Connections, people. That's what makes us happy. if you have wholesome family relationships, if you have good friends, and you have a membership in a community, the odds are you're going to be a lot happier. And it's not food, and it's not finance, and all the other things that people come up with that start with the letter F. It's not any of that. That's what matters. Relationships matter. Just the other day, I was speaking to a group of middle school students. Again, OHIL was very involved, unfortunately, with the situation in a school in the community where there was a predator, where an administrator turned out to be a predator. It could happen in any school, I want to say clearly. We do not know how to detect such people, but we were talking to the kids. It's a slightly different subject than we're talking about tonight. We're talking to the kids how to be safe, how to avoid the dangers of somebody preying upon you on the internet. And one of the things I had to tell the kids, I want to talk about what are the risks, when are you more at risk that someone may make believe he's a young girl when he's really a man with nefarious, with less than desirable motives in mind. And I said, if you're going through a hard time, and it can happen to anyone, we all go through hard times. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, if there's friction in your home, if you've been having some academic problems, if you had a breakup, if you've been bullied, and you're feeling down, and we all know those feelings, we've all been there. What do you crave? Besides a solution to your problem, but there's no immediate solution problem. You crave connections. You crave contact. That's what we so emphasize in our bereavement team. When people are suffering a loss, they want connections. That's what they need. So then you're most at risk, that's someone who wants to, in fact, the predators know. They're on the lookout for someone who is having a hard time. They're on the lookout for someone who's depressed. They're on the lookout for someone who's having a conflictual relationship with their parents because they can endear themselves to that person. And it can be very dangerous. So again, connections are very important. And therefore, when we're having dinner, or we're putting our child to sleep, or we need to have a conversation with that child because something that's going on in their lives, if we're picking up the phone every 3 seconds because texts are coming in or messages are coming in, the child is not going to feel connected. Or if the child's checking their WhatsApp, their Reddit, their YOLO, while we're talking, you're not connecting. There's 2 stories I mentioned. One grandmother told me recently that she was babysitting for her grandchildren. And she was putting her child to sleep, the youngest grandchild to sleep. And she was reading her a story, whatever, and her phone rang in the middle. And she ignored it. The next morning when she woke up, when her mother was there, she said, Bubby was so great, she was so terrific. Her phone rang and she didn't take it while she was reading me a story. And by the way, children, there's a study out of the UK that shows that children seem to be more concerned about the parents' use of their cell phones than the parents are about the kids' use of cell phones. They want to be connected, they want to hear, they want to be heard, and they want to be connected. There's another story I heard, which really is not even directly related to this, but it's indirectly related, about a child who comes home. I don't know if it's a true story, I think it is a true story, but I don't know the person who it happened to. Kid came home and he's trying to talk to his mother. His mother's preparing dinner. I mean, you can't blame, right? So she's listening and she's potchking around the kitchen, cooking and gathering things and mixing and spicing. And the kid's talking. And the kid keeps saying, "Ma, you're not listening to me." She says, "I'm listening to you." And she's busy. He said, "Ma, you're not listening to me." And finally she said, "But I'm listening to you." And finally he said, "But you're not listening with your eyes." Children want us to listen with our eyes, and when we're going like this, checking, we're not listening with our eyes. Now let me tell you what most people like myself will tell you as a solution, and it's a very good solution, but I want to offer you even a better one. Most people will tell you, comes dinner time, shut off your phone. You're putting kid to bed, it's going to sleep, shut your phone. During homework time, child shuts his or her phone, etc., etc. And that's great. And if that's not your solution, you're already ahead of the game. I think I have even a better solution. Sit there during dinner with your phone on. And every time it dings and rings and bings, ignore it because you're eating dinner. I think that's even better. Because what does one say and what does the other one say? Shutting it down says, I know I can't resist it, so I'm going to have to shut it. Which, okay, good, that's fine. But what if it's ringing away and you're just ignoring it because you're talking to your child now. You're telling the child, I'm in control of this. It's not in control of me. I can ignore it because I'm talking to you, just like that grandmother. because you're more important than anything going on there. And by the way, and it's a very interesting, it always strikes me as interesting, because before there were cell phones, a phone would ring, people would ignore it. Or a door, someone would knock on the door, you could ignore it. But these, we can't. As soon as it rings, we feel like, because it creates in ourselves, there's like an adrenaline rush, or probably more likely a dopamine rush. And we have to see it. We have to know it right away. And it's very hard. I know I have a hard time, very hard time resisting it. But I have a homework assignment for you. Let's wait till Monday night. Sunday's like an off day, right? Monday night, answer your phone as much as you want, etc. Monday night, go through all your messages, all your WhatsApps, everything that you just couldn't resist, your Facebook site, comments, whatever, that you had to answer right away. And find me one that couldn't wait for an hour, if not two. If you're an emergency room doctor, I understand that matter because of my work at Oval as a trauma director. I have to sometimes look because I don't know if it was a tragedy or if there was or a family I'm helping with a sick parent that the parent died. So I do have to look. But when let's say nothing's pending or whatever, sometimes, or I take a quick look and if I see it's not that, I quickly put it away. But that's a much more powerful message. I'm in control of it. It's not controlling me. And that, I think, is even, but you know what? Don't take it for granted. It's like building up a muscle. It's like a workout. You got to develop that. It doesn't come naturally. And also, when you communicate via the devices, it's a compromised communication. There's no body language. There's no pauses. There's no inflection in your voice. And certainly the research shows, and it's very important, that face-to-face communication with all that is far more meaningful. And it's going to go a lot further than communicating through devices. So when there's important conversations, we have to do it in that fashion. We have to put away the phone. The other thing, by the way, that's important is it's what we used to call bitul zman. It's a waste of time. Now, again, I'm not saying throw it out. I'm not saying kids can't play games in them. But first of all, outlets, healthy outlets are very important for your children, particularly yeshiva children, because their day is so long and their day is so pressured. They need to play ball. They need to play music. They need to do woodworking. They need hobbies. They need yoga. They need it. It's not just a luxury, because it's essential. But playing a game on the phone is downtime. You're not doing something constructive, but they're not relaxed afterwards. I remember when I was a kid, when we ran up and down that basketball court for an hour, I was completely relaxed. I was wiped out and usually lost terribly, but that's another story. But I was more relaxed afterwards. Children after playing Fortnite are not more relaxed afterwards. So within reason, they can play games, but it's not that soothing outlet behavior. And I want to tell you something very interesting. I'm going to tell you something personal. Whenever I'm working with kids for many years, if there was something that what they were interested in, I would try to check it out. So if there was a TV show they were really into, we got rid of our TV in my house when my kids were between like about 15 and 5. So if there was a TV show, I used to go, my parents were alive, I used to go to my parents' house to watch 1 or 2 episodes. If there was a song on the radio that the teens I was working with were really into, I would listen to the song and I would try to get a sense of it once or twice. Now I'm seeing a lot of kids who are obsessed with Fortnite, even some adults. And it crossed my mind, Fortnite is, I think people are looking, it's a very popular video game. So it crossed my mind, you know what, maybe I'll go and play a little bit just to get a sense so I understand firsthand what it's like. And I've been resisting it. You know why? I'm afraid if I start, apparently it's so addictive, I'm afraid I'll get hooked. And I won't be able to put it down. So I'm afraid to even experiment with it. That's how addictive it is. The other thing that's very important to keep in mind, and that I see my time's coming up, so I'll wrap up pretty quickly, but it's also important in terms of communicating with our children and connecting, is that these devices, the computer in general and the phone, distorts our sense of time. And I'll explain to you what it is. And I'm sure we've all had that experience, that we've been doing something on the computer, and it was 9:10, and we thought we were on for a half hour, we look and it's 11 o'clock. And where did the time go? Now, the reason for that is that most time-consuming activities, there's a sort of in and out experience, cognitively. You're hearing something, then you check out. Like some of you are listening to me, and then you're thinking about it and reflecting, and then you're listening again. It has a sort of like waves and that kind of flow. The internet, the computer, and that's, by the way, true of television and movies also, are so fast-paced and so multidimensional that we lose our sense of time. So when we tell our child, okay, you did your homework, you want to play a game for half hour, you can play a game for half hour. When that half hour is up, they're going to feel like they're on for just 10 minutes. Now, if we're going to gain mastery, that's what I was saying, our goal is to be the rulers of the game. And that's what we want to teach our children also. We love the devices. They have enhanced our life significantly. And they're going to be part of our lives. But it's a device that we use. And you're going to have to learn that when you're playing a video game, or when you're communicating with your friends on YOLO, that time flies. It happens a lot quicker. And if there's a time constraint, when that time is up, you're not gonna think you really had your full time. That's gaining mastery of it. We're gonna learn how to adjust and adapt to the reality of that. Now, I'm just very quickly, I want to talk about how do you monitor with children, or I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot more in the panel. But I want to talk about it, and I'll tell you my own bias. I'm not a big fan of filters. I have them, great. I think most of the kids not have bypassed the filters. So I don't think that's going to work. I think a far better approach is what they call monitoring devices, which are apps that give you the option of seeing and knowing what your children are doing. And by the way, but here's a very important point. Put it in your child's phone, but put it in your own phone also. And when you tell your child, I'm putting this device in because I want to know what you're doing. I want to make sure you're safe. I want to make sure that you're not overdoing it. You're not sneaking it into your room at night and playing and it should never be in the room. The phone should never be in the room with the kids. But you know what? Mommy sees everything I'm doing. And I see everything Mommy's doing. It's not just you. This is how we gain mastery of this device. This is how we create certain safeguards because of the very dangerous and destructive kind of things that you can go on and get involved with when you're online. And there's I'm going to just tell you some of the very good programs. There are new programs out that are very helpful, but there are a whole bunch of them. There's one called Our Pact, which is very popular. Again, gives you that oversight. And by the way, the capacity to shut down the kid's phone when it's time to go to sleep, so they can't use it. There's a new program, Bark, which has an annual fee, but uses algorithms to identify potentially dangerous or destructive or harmful sites or activities that the child does. So it's not like you have to look at it and then make that judgment. It's almost as if the app makes that judgment for you. I mentioned before Family Time, which is one of the app that not only monitors the phone, but also tells you when your child is driving over 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. Net Nanny, K9, these are some of the common programs. But as I said, do it for yourself as well. With the reshut of the Rabbanim, I just want to conclude my part, which I see my time is up, with just a Torah insight I just had a week ago, and I think it's very relevant. Last week we read Parshat Noach, and we read about the Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, the tower that people gathered together in one valley. It's a very interesting part. It's like 9 psukim, and as somebody pointed out, it's the transition between Noach and Abraham. It's interesting. But they gathered in the valley and they discovered brick making, that they were able to make bricks. This must have been an incredible discovery. It was technology. You didn't have to build things with stones, you could build them with bricks. And they built this huge tower, and God got very angry, and he created different languages, so people were confused. And many of the commentators struggle exactly what happened here. What was the sin? And if God was so angry, why didn't he smite them with all this, with plagues or whatever? Or, fire and brimstone. Why did he create, Italian and French and Yiddish? What was the point of that? So the Abarbanel, one of the classic commentators, says something that's very hard to understand. He says, you know what the problem was? That they made bricks. They should have built with stone. Why are you tampering with nature? Why are you changing nature? God gave us stones, build with stones. Now it's very hard to understand, because is the Abarbanel saying we shouldn't progress? We shouldn't drive cars? We should become like the Amish? That we should only use what nature gives us? And besides that, if you know anything about the Abarbanel, He was one of the most worldly of all the commentators. He was the treasurer for Ferdinand and Isabella. He financed Spain's near conquest of the world. Was he sitting there and counting with his fingers? He didn't use the technology of that time? So I have an answer to that question. I don't think that Barbanel was saying he was against technology. I don't think he was against advancement. But when you discover something new, don't build a skyscraper. Don't try to war with God. Don't try to think now you're so powerful. Don't let it so take over your life that you have that kind of grandiosity that you think you're on par with the Almighty. Use it. Own it. Benefit from it. But you're in charge. You're the boss. Ignore the messages. Tell your child how and when they can use it. And I think, by the way, there has to be regular instruction now in schools. We will use it to our benefit, but we will control it. It won't control us. And with God's help and with more meetings like this and more growth, we'll be able to raise healthy children who we can communicate with, and we can derive much nachat and happiness from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blumenthal. We're now going to change the format to the panel for the answering questions. So all index cards that you got, those are for your questions. And I'm going to invite the campus director of Emet, Rabbi Kegel, to come here and do his thing.
Can we still be heard on Torah anytime? So, yeah, let's put the Stender right there, maybe. Not too far away. It's here. Okay, wonderful. All right, welcome everybody. So, before I call up our awesome panel, I just want to tell you a little story. I'm coming from Shabbaton that we just did in Passaic, New Jersey. I've been on campus for the last 12 years with Emet. It's been a real privilege. We go to different colleges around New York, Manhattan, Queens, and even going to Stony Brook, Long Island. So as of late, I'll tell you it's been the #1 Kirov tool. Does anyone recognize this? Yes, it's a cell phone. Now, it has not been the #1 Kirov tool because, you know, I'm like WhatsApping everybody and all that other jazz. No, it's become the #1 Kirov tool, and I became observant myself. So, and I just see this is acting so amazingly. Because when I became religious, so the difference between a regular day and Shabbos, wasn't that great? You know, like, okay, you didn't watch TV, you didn't run to your telephone, but it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing like the difference between a regular day and Shabbos right now. That we have these things that we're all addicted to in our pockets, like Dr. Blumenthal was saying. Now these students that we have, they don't keep Shabbos. And we have them in for Shabbatons. And this Shabbos we had around 20 students. I think they all kept Shabbos. I know at least half of them did because I personally confiscated their cell phones and locked them up. Now what do you think happens after those 25 hours? The students stand up and speak during Shalosh Chodesh, during third meal, and they say, this has been the most meaningful 25 hours of my life. I talked with people. I had deep conversations that I never had before because, you know, these guys are 18, 19, girls are 18, 19 years old, and they've been with their phone their whole lives. All their memories are with their phone. Now you put away the phone for 25 hours, say, wow, this is Shabbos. I'm so connected to friends. I see families are so connected. This is what I want to do. So the cell phone, in a way, has become our #1 tool because people realize, not having this for 25 hours, I want to join. So even in things that may not have so much good, they're still good. Hashem finds a way. It's really amazing. So I want to call up the panelists. And also, if any of you have any questions or anything, please write them down because this is going to be a really great discussion, open forum, very candid. The panelists don't know what we're asking them. I have some questions on my own that I'm thinking of. Okay, so first, a person that needs no introduction because he just spoke for the last half hour, Dr. Blumenthal. Please come on, yes. As we used to say, come on up. Okay, I don't know if anyone got that joke. Okay, next we have a well-known therapist specializing, I believe, in addictions, and his name is Dr. Akiva Perlman. Please join the panel. Okay. Next, we have founder and lead rabbi, one of the lead rabbis, probably the lead rabbi of Chazaq, Rabbi Ilan Meirov. Thank you. And last but certainly not least in my world, the CEO of Emet, an MSW in his own right, not only doing here but also counseling. And I don't know how much he deals with technology in terms of our students, but I feel he's definitely involved. Rabbi Akiva Rutenberg. Come on up. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, please hand them up in the index cards. Just if you have blank index cards, hand them up also. We will make up questions. Did you have an index card? If any of you guys have questions? No, it's okay if you don't, because I thought maybe you have questions for one another, but you didn't want to ask. Or you didn't want to. Okay, yes, please hand up all the index cards. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Any questions, please hand them to Adam. Blank index cards, amazing. Thank you. Thank you for handing this back. Okay. Fine. Also, what I really like is that, there is, looks like some diversity in the realm of Orthodox Judaism from this panel. So it's going to be interesting to see how everyone responds to the different questions. Okay, so the first question that we have, and by the way, if anyone thinks of anything, please write it down and hand it up. I don't want to start calling out on people because then I'll miss someone and they'll feel insulted or anything, and I don't want it to be recorded on Troy anytime that I insulted anybody. Okay, first question is, my teenage son told me, Abba or Mama or Mommy, trust me, I don't need a filter. How do I respond as a parent? Okay, so let's go with Dr. Akiva Perlman. And I'm going to give you the mic so they can hear you.
Okay.
Can I hold your water? Here,
All right. We spoke about filters a little bit before. What? Oh, thank you. We spoke about filters a little bit before, and obviously I think there's going to be a difference of opinion on this panel about how we feel about filters. The notion of saying, trust me, I do believe, starters, we should be trusting our children. The objective is to arrive at a place where we absolutely trust our children. But that is something that warrants nurture in order to get to a place where we could look at our children, they could look at us, and there's a trusting relationship. It's not something that simply happens. It's something that we need to earn, we need to develop over time. And understanding the nature of technology, we need to take serious consideration as to how it affects us personally. And one thing we know based on the data, we've seen literally every single year since it's been around, that the people spend more and more time on it. It's inherently addictive. It's created to be addictive. It's created to be something that we spend a lot of time on. So we're trying to take it away from something that's personal. Anytime it becomes personal, trust me, I want to trust you. I want to be present with you, but at the same time, I understand the power of this technology. I understand how challenging it is to be in that place. And we're going to get to some interesting topics, I assume, when it comes to some of the harms, some of the dangers, some of the content that exists online. And I think that's something we could say to our children. I do trust you, and I do love you, and I trust myself. But I know how much I struggle with this. I know how hard it is for me every single time we sit down together as a family and put it away. I know how challenging it is. So trying to get real and understanding honestly what technology is, how it ultimately affects us, we do need to have some oversight. There needs to be some understanding that it could be very harmful for a variety of different ways and a variety of different means. And as a result of that, I do trust you, I do love you, but I understand that it's complicated and I need to be a part of this process. When you get to a place where you're an adult and you have your own internal oversight, or you have someone who's looking out for you, then I'm going to pass you along to that individual. But we all warrant some degree of accountability, because if not, we're going to just buy into what the system is, and the system is one that's inherently addictive. And I don't want to harm you. I'm accountable to make sure that you're okay and your well-being is well taken care of. And this is something that, if left unchecked, will ultimately hurt you. And I think we need to change just a little bit. I just want to throw this in, and I'll pass it along. We need to change a little bit of a definition of parenting when it comes to technology. Generally speaking, we perceive healthy parenting as a child who's very comfortable with us and very happy with us, and they're communicating well and effectively. But when we think about technology, a good parenting dynamic with their child is not going to be one that's filled with comfort. There's going to be a little bit of anxiety that's present in that relationship, and that's okay. We need to understand going in, there's going to be a little bit of anxiety, at least a little bit, possibly more, because there's a tension. And that tension is not just between you and your child, the tension is between us and our relationship with technology. And once we could accept that this is a tense experience, then we're more comfortable with the process of creating some form of guidelines, some form of oversight that ultimately will benefit the children.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. That was a very, I love that answer. Just coming from more of a former Soviet background, if you tell your parents usually, hey, trust me, your parents say, what, are you crazy? But your answer was just it was so I want to trust you. And you sort of get to the same way, which it's so beautiful. Okay, we're going to let two of our Chashava panelists answer each question. And I will randomly choose the two next. So the next answer to this question is going to be Rabbi Meirov. So again, the question is, if your teenage son says, Abba, trust me, I don't need a filter, I got it, I'm strong.
Trust is the foundation of any relationship between a husband and a wife, between a parent and a child, between community members. So anytime someone tells you, trust me, like the previous speaker, Dr. Akiva Perlman just stated, you got to tell them, I do trust you and I do love you. But at the same time, the dangers are real and greater people have fallen in the past. One thing I would suggest, I've discussed it with couples in the past as well, when the husband has a lack of trust in his wife or vice versa, I would tell him very simple, and Baruch Hashem, it seems like it's a successful method. I would tell him very simply, I don't see any reason why a couple or children should have different passwords to get into their phones. You can have the same exact password for every single child, and every single member of the household should have the same number, 1111 or 2222, right? And there should be no reason to have any secrecy behind what your password is. So if you're sitting on the couch and your phone is not there and your wife's phone is there, you should be able to pick it up and use it just like it's your own phone. And if a family actually has such a system where they tell each other, listen, the trust is so real, I'm not concerned about hiding any information, then you see that there's a certain comfort zone between everyone. There's nothing to hide. I think Dr. Blumenthal also mentioned before, you have these apps where you're able to monitor what everyone's doing. It's not just for your child to have it. You could tell your son, Shimon, not just putting it on your phone, it's going to be on my phone and on mommy's phone. We're all going to be monitoring each other. So there's a certain understanding that's not because we don't trust you, it's because we know how great the danger is. I once told a couple as a joke, but they actually told me it worked very nicely. I said to them once, when they had this issue of trust, I said, you could have at any point, you could just go to your husband or your wife and say, hey, put your phone down and see what they're doing, right? You can't click even one more, Rabbi, what do you mean? It shows a lack of trust. No. You have to do it 3 times a week. You must do it 3 times a week. So there's no reason to think that I'm suspecting you. And believe it or not, I was saying as a joke, but one couple that did it said, Rabbi, it's an amazing system. Right? Rabbi just said, put your phone down, and he picks up his hands. It looked like you were doing a share, we were watching a football game. You know what I'm saying? But the idea is that there's a level of understanding. We're working together in this. We're doing this together as a team. We're going to try to grow as a team, and we're going to try to prevent any problems as a team. So again, with a teenage son, obviously they want to feel that their father and mother trust them in every way, shape, or form. But it's a danger zone, and when it involves danger, we got to show them that we're all going to be putting the necessary steps to protect ourselves, even though we're 30, 40, 50 years old. It's going to be for us, and it's also for you as well.
Okay. Beautiful. One of my kids is actually here in the studio audience, so I'm very careful what I'm going to be saying about parenting today. Okay. Next, I may have to skip some questions. Okay, next question is, I guess let's go with, there's two classifications of kids, I think, for our purposes here. We have like before teenagers that have technological use, and teens and up, because we do have to say that there is a difference. Once the teenagers get a little bit confident, obviously, just like us when we were kids, they think they know better than us. And before kids or teenagers, usually, they listen to us, which is amazing. So the next question is, for preteens, people who are not teenagers yet, how much time do the members of this panel think is appropriate for a child to be spending on technology per day? That includes, whatever iPad, net, whatever that thing is. And we're going to start with Rabbi Rutenberg. What's the appropriate amount of time that a preteen should be spending on technology per day?
Hello everyone, good evening. I think as little as possible.
Can you quantify that?
I think it really depends on the kid, depends on the situation. I don't think there's a one size fits all for these things. It also really depends on what kind of content they're watching or doing. I'll share a personal thing. We have a PS4 in the house for the last 2-3 years, and it's upstairs in my son's bedroom on the 3rd floor. And I knew my second oldest son, was 16, was playing Fortnite, and I'm pretty busy, Baruch Hashem, doing good things. And my daughter, who's 6, mentions to me last week, it was like, I think, Wednesday night, and my wife went to a class, and she mentions to me, she's like, she said she was playing Fortnite, or she was doing Fortnite, and something about 100 kills. And I'm like, what? I didn't know you were playing Fortnite. So it turns out her older brother, who's 9, started playing Fortnite, and I didn't realize either of them were playing. And honestly, I never really even seen what a Fortnite game looks like. Like a Blumenthal with you. So I looked at it, and I've told my older son that, my 16-year-old, I told him that I was not comfortable with him playing anything like Call of Duty or anything which is like real violence. But Fortnite, the way it was described to me, sounded like it was okay in that aspect. And I told the 9-year-old and the 6-year-old, I said, you're not playing this anymore. I didn't know you were doing this, you're not doing it anymore. And I don't know if anyone who lived in Kew Garden Hills, I live in Kew Gardens, might have heard the shrieks all the way over there. But I said, that's it. I didn't realize you were doing this. And I said, we'll buy you other games that are more appropriate, but you're not playing the game. And I think that there was an immediate reaction where they weren't so happy. Thank God they had just gotten into it, so I sort of nipped it in the bud. But I think that when it comes to younger kids, and I would even say this with my 14-year-old son, that they actually appreciate when we set limits for them. They don't admit to it immediately, but they really do appreciate the limits. And they appreciate that we care enough about them that we don't want them to do this. And my 6-year-old daughter, my only daughter, we're pretty close, she looks at me and she goes, I said, this is not good for you. She goes, but I didn't kill anyone. verbatim. They do appreciate that, and I think that we have to use a lot of chachma, which is a lot of seichel, when it comes to technology for ourselves, for our children. There's no simple one approach to take with it. If they feel that we're limiting them, then they're going to rebel against us. So I think there's a lot of seichel. I just wanted to say this. My parents have a Rav in Muncie who passed away a few years ago, a Pessin, and he used to say that people come to me with problems And they say, why did Hashem give me such a complicated problem? So he would ask them, what's your IQ? And they would say, often they would say, a pretty high IQ. So he said, do you complain to Hashem that he gave you a high IQ? He says, no. So why do you complain that he gave you problems that you have to use your whole IQ? You know, you have 130 IQ, but you want to have a problem with the 70 IQ, right? And the reality is that we have to use our seichel, we have to use our head. And sometimes I think technology, Dr. Blumenthal was mentioning, tends to shut us down our brains and make us not think. But I think we have to use our seichel, we have to look at situations, and not every child has to be treated the same way. Some children can be treated different than others, which is its own complication. But I think to answer the question, to limit it as much as possible within reason, and to be very conscious of the situation.
Great. Please pass it to Dr. Blumenthal. Do you remember the question?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm going to, so I realize that I'll probably pretty much repeat very quickly what Akiva said, but I think you alluded to something very important, which is it's very difficult if everybody else is doing it. I have to check. I call this delusions of unanimity. When you tell your kid they can't do something, but everybody else does it. So the reason why everybody else does it is because they told their parents that you allowed them to do it. So first of all, be in touch with other parents, because sometimes parents are allowing their children, this covers a lot of things, to do certain things so they think everybody else is doing it, and they're not, or the parents have the same reservation. So just like I always say, the children during recess are plotting together how to undermine us. So we have to talk to each other. That's one thing that's important. But you can't be terribly at odds with everybody else. It's very hard for a child, if everybody else is doing something, for your child to be different. And here again, I'm going to bring up something I alluded to earlier. It's here to stay. Video games, technology, it's here. So I'm much more interested. I do want to curtail it a bit, and I want to have limits, but I also want to teach mastery. So what I would recommend, just before, with a preteen, when you're first introducing your child, when they finally reach that age that you have decided they're ready to use some of the technology, to have a tablet for a certain amount of time, to carry a cell phone. Don't just hand it to them and say, okay, you wouldn't do that with the car, right? When your child's ready to drive, you're just going to hand them the keys to the car, now go drive. What do? We give them lessons, and we teach them about safety, and we teach them how to drive the car. So when they're ready at that age to start using technology, don't just hand it to them. Sit down with them, explain it to them. Explain why there's certain programs, as Akiva said, why they're so addictive, why they're programmed this, why the company can make a lot of money if they grab you and make you want to stay longer. And use it with them at first. In other words, before you just hand the phone to them, let me show it to you. Let's do something together. Let's play a game together. Let's be on a social media site together. Let me show you how to use it. Let me show you how to understand it. Let me teach you how to time yourself. Let me teach you how to know when you've been on it long enough. So whatever age you decide, and I think it is very hard to pinpoint a specific age, because it depends on the child, it depends on the community, and it's going to change. I mean, we're seeing a dramatic increase in use of computers and of devices and social media in preschool. But just don't hand it over to them. Teach them, instruct them, because that's, I think, really the ultimate goal that we want to get to. As I said earlier, is that we're the masters of the devices rather than they're being our masters.
I just add one quick thing.
Of course, you have the mic.
I studied in a couple of schools, ranging from elementary school all the way through high school in the Jewish schooling systems. And I wanted to figure out at what point do parents sort of lose their grip and their hold over their children and their relationship with technology. And turns out, when I ran the study a few years ago, that breaking point was the beginning of high school. In elementary school, and certainly even in middle school, parents were much more aware of what their kids were doing. But the second they stepped foot in high school, it was as if they had no control whatsoever. So when Dr. Blumenthal is talking about education, those first early steps, like we're talking about education needs to take place prior to that cutoff point, where by the time they walk into high school, they already have some degree of mastery. Not absolute mastery, but to some form of degree, so they're empowered when they walk into that space.
Okay, beautiful, thank you. Okay, our next question is, our 11-year-old plays a certain video game, and he wants to open an account with this game, whatever that means. Is this dangerous? So I just want to say, before this question is answered, I think it's very important for us as parents to realize that, especially before high school, when someone's 11, we have a tremendous amount of control with our children. And I would say after high school, we also have control, not as much, that's true, because we have to definitely give them our independence. We have to keep communication going. We have to have a beautiful, trusting relationship. But we cannot forget that we are the parents. And I often tell my kids that, until you're 18, you have to do what we say. So I'm waiting to see what happens after they're 18. Hopefully, by that time, I think they'll get used to it. So, but you cannot be afraid to parent. We can't. We're parenting our kids. The kids are not parenting us. So to answer this question, if your 11-year-old wants to play a certain video game and open an account on it, and is this dangerous, what should you do? Rabbi Meirov.
The truth is, I'm not such a bucky when it comes to opening up accounts in games. Baruch Hashem, I haven't had the question come to me yet from my kids. But I will tell you one thing, that ultimately, an 11-year-old is an 11-year-old. He is still at the point in life where he looks up to his father and his mother, and he understands their authority. So with that being said, there has to be, rules that are set forth that are very, very clear and very, very, with the set boundaries that the children in the household have to understand and accept. Now, what's going to happen is, but my friends are doing it, and she's doing it, the guy down the block is doing it, so you can't just shut it down and leave them with nothing. You have to be creative enough and say, what kind of game is this? What's happening over there? What are they doing? So maybe if it's a game that's not so problematic, you might say, bechavod, go ahead. But many times it leads to some other things and other exciting adventures that they sign up to that may not be up to par with your family wants. So therefore, you have to give them another option. You have to create some other. Okay, so maybe you can't do this now, but let me hear what other things you want to do. Oh, that I wasn't wanted that. Mommy, I wasn't wanted that. You know what? This is something that, as a family and our value system, it sits well with us. We'll get this view instead. Because if you just shut them down and they feel like they're left out in the cold, they're gonna eventually Chazaq rebel against you as they get to the high school age or maybe a little older, and say, now I'm more independent. I don't have to rely on you anymore. So yes, you definitely have to put your foot down. I think not by slamming it down. You have to do it nice and soft, but they have to accept it. At the same time, you would have to try to find some sort of other means to hopefully appease them and make them feel they're not left outside.
Okay, great. How about Rabbi Rutenberg? How would you? I think you already answered this. What about Dr. Perlman? If you a preteen, how much control do you suggest we have?
I want to introduce everyone to a wonderful website that deals with ratings of each game. As we know, when you look at the Android as well as iPhone, they have there's a rating, an age rating connected to every game. But there's another website that does it a lot more thoroughly. It's conscientious with regards to parenting and children. It's called Common Sense Media. And with Common Sense Media, you could literally put in the name of any book, the name of any movie, and certainly the name of any app. And they'll give you some sense of what this app is, and how it's played, and what becomes available to a person once they're on that app. So a game, for example, as an 11-year-old, that gives them access to like chats on the side, you just want to be a little wary of that. It opens up an entire world that you may not be aware of. I'm working now with a young man who got involved in some pretty wild, crazy behavior as a result of learning something on some of these chats. And it was at a very young age. And the parents had no idea until years later that this guy was developing relationships online with other people. You really want to know, and you need to be open to the idea of educating yourself and dancing with your children as to what's helpful, what's not helpful. But you first want to know, what is that game, or what is that app that they're really attracted to? What exists, what side elements to that app exist, so we could begin to have conversations with them about it, as well as reach out to other parents and try to get a sense of what the norm is within that age group.
Great. Okay, yes, that's so important. And it's so hard to always see what your kids are doing. And it's hard to have these difficult conversations. And parenting, is a real job. So we actually have a couples type question next. So the question in hand is, I'm just going to say for both genders, my wife/husband seems to be ignoring me and spending time on the phone instead, on the technology instead. What is the best way for me to deal with this? Dr. Blumenthal, do you do some couples work as well?
I want to thank my wife for submitting that question. I think it goes back to what we mentioned before, that, like even with the trust question. I mean, my answer to a child when we'll say trust me is I don't trust myself. And we don't realize ourselves. It's part and parcel, we're talking about the addictive nature. It's part and parcel that comes with any addiction is a lack of self-reflection. In other words, any addict, whether the addiction is devices, or the addiction is food, or the addiction is sex, or addiction is gambling, loses that what we call the observing ego, which in other words, the capacity to look at yourself and know what to do, because everybody thinks they're in better control than they really are. And therefore, I think and we're not immune, and we can also get very caught up in, and I know this happened to me sometimes when I've gotten interested in something on a device, whatever, and then suddenly I realized, again, the same thing I said about the kids happened to me. That I thought I'm going to look at it for 5 minutes, and I see it's 45 minutes, and I had lost track of that time. So part of marriage is, we can ask the question, what are the functions of marriage? And that could be a whole other topic. But one of the functions of marriage is mutual growth. That it's somebody who cares about us a lot, is observing us, and gives us feedback. And from that feedback, we both grow. And I think it's important, therefore, to give in a meaningful, without accusations, but in a straightforward way. And also, by the way, this goes with speaking to spouses, and I said also speaking to children, not putting yourself up on a pedestal, because none of us are immune to these dangers, and so we can fall prey. So when you say to somebody, when you're speaking to your spouse or to your child, with that humility, that I think you're too caught up in something, you're not attentive to me because of the devices, and I know that can happen to me too. If it's said in that spirit, the other person will hear it much better.
I like that. Hold on. I just want to reiterate, this is like great communication. So you don't say like, what's wrong with you? It's more fun to say it that way. But instead, you have to say like, I'm also struggling with this. You say, this is very American. I'm also struggling with this. Maybe we could do this together. It works. I wish the other way worked better. It's like more fun, but it just doesn't work. All right, next. Rabbi Rutenberg, what would you do? What would you say to a couple that feels like the other person is ignoring them and is on the cell phone device?
So I think it's a great question. I'm looking for the answer myself. Mrs.
Rutenberg
here. I think that just sort of going back on what Dr. Blumenthal started off this whole program tonight, this whole issue, this whole challenge is such a new challenge. It's only about 12 years old. Believe it or not, the iPhone was introduced, I think, was it 12 years ago? Like, when we had a BlackBerry, I wasn't an early adapter. I had a BlackBerry until, like, I think 7 years ago. And, like, this whole issue, like, is a 10-year-old issue. And it's taken over our lives in ways that we don't even have a clue. And studies are just beginning to come out to understand what this is. And studies connecting, like comparing the dopamine levels in your brain and the different parts of your brain that light up from a heroin high, comparing that to getting a text message and a WhatsApp message. And this is a pretty scary situation. It's a pretty scary thing. And I think that we have to look at this from the perspective that we really don't know. We really don't know what the right approach to take to this whole issue is. And once we take that approach of being aware that we don't know, I think it already opens up possibilities for introspection, for not getting so defensive. And, for example, when we think of parenting, when we think of our relationship with our spouse, we usually model on our parents' relationship. We can't do that here. We can't. Our parents didn't have these devices. You know, many of us didn't even have these devices when we got married in the beginning of our relationships. And just an example, I picked up this book called 24/6, The Power of Unplugging One Day a Week. And this is written by an author who is, I believe she's Jewish, but not particularly religious, who married somebody who was both very successful people, and her husband was basically keeping Shabbos, but not necessarily religious Shabbos, but they don't use their cell phones and any technology. I believe maybe they use a landline, whatever, but they don't use any type of like cellular technology or computers or on Shabbos. And this is a secular person who came to a realization that this would totally transform their life by having this separation from technology. And I want to share a personal thing. This summer, my wife and I had our 20th anniversary, and my job is very, very connected to my phone. Okay, that's an understatement. Someone in my office showed me the amount of minutes I used my phone in the month of October, and that was a month with like every other day was a Yom Tov, and it was a scary amount to see how much I used it. And we went away for a week, and I made a conscious decision not to take my phone with me. And I left my phone.
They were ignoring me.
I left my phone. I took a laptop. I checked my email once a day, and I designated one of my sons who's he's very, very interested in what I do, and he's like 11 years old, and I said, okay, this is where I put the phone. No one else is allowed to know where the phone is. On day 3 of my trip, you're going to turn it on. I'm going to call you. You're going to go through my messages to see if there's any emergencies. And he did that twice over the trip. He really enjoyed it. And the crazy thing was, we had a long flight. But just the fact that I didn't have my phone with me, I felt relaxed just not having the phone. And I noticed this myself. I live in Kew Gardens. I live like 2 blocks from the shul. And if I don't take my cell phone with me to shul, I'm like breathing deeper. I'm actually walking straighter as I walk to shul. And it's amazing how this technology has affected us. And I think that if we take the attitude of we're exploring ways to disconnect with this very important device, it really does make a difference if we take that mindset.
So you recommend that the couple yell at each other, talk it out? The couple text each other. First of all, what you said is very powerful, and we're really all too addicted to technology. I think Dr. Blumenthal said it right. We really need a parents forum. So, but at the end of the day, what would you recommend? How should they interact with each other in terms of solving this issue? Quickly.
Basically, what I'm recommending is accepting that this is a major, major challenge, and then going into it with that mindset. So in my case, I use my phone much more than my wife. So for our trip, it made sense for her to take her cell phone, me not to take mine. And it could be the same thing with some of you guys or some people in the audience. Like, if you're much more likely to get a message, so go into a restaurant with your spouse and leave, so your children can reach you if there's an emergency, but leave the other phone in the car, or leave it with, and it goes with, again, what I'm trying to say is a mindset of, this is a challenge, and we have to find solutions to the challenge. We have to be creative in finding solutions to this challenge. And
okay, beautiful.
I think it would be helpful to work out together as a couple, that there are certain times or certain places or experiences that together you're saying, we know this is complicated, but this is a cell phone free experience, which means nothing sadder than watching a married couple in bed watching 2 different shows. There's something about watching a show together and talking about it, having an experience like that. Or even not speaking at all, because the second you get into bed, and we all need to diffuse, everyone's working overtime at this point. We all need to find a way to relax, but we also need to find a way to connect. So making certain times or spaces or experiences a deliberate process of, just like we spoke about dinner. Dinner is a time where you either put it away or you don't respond to it. Other times working out as a couple to say, our relationship, our marriage, our connection matters more than whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish in this moment. And come up with some type of plan. And you need to check back into it. I don't think you set it in stone and it remains in stone. This is the type of thing that you come up with an idea and then 3 months later you need to renew it all over again or maybe revise it. But work together to create space for one another that's meaningful.
Okay, beautiful. Dr. Perlman's spouse is also Dr. Perlman,
Yeah.
and yeah, their conversations must be so nice. How do you feel about that? Okay.
I just state for the record that we don't do that. We just love each other. That's it.
So beautiful. Okay, next question. Okay, regarding teenagers who are already hooked on YouTube, Fortnite, etc., what do we do about these things? They complain that they're bored and that everyone's doing it. What should we do as parents? So I'm going to try to field this one. So, the first thing when I'm faced with a difficult situation as a parent, or in any situation really, but especially as a parent, is I pray to God. I daven to Hashem for help, because we're trying to really raise good Yiddish kinderlach, beautiful Jewish children. And how can we do without Hashem? So it's very important to remember that for any of these teenage issues, couple issues, whatever, whenever we're not fully in control, which is often, we need to pray to God. We really need to daven to Hashem. Besides that, in parenting, I always really strongly feel that the parents are following the child's lead. Okay, so when my boys were about to enter teenagehood, and I was worried about them being on YouTube more than I wanted to be, anything else more I wanted to be on, so I asked several different Rabbis at high schools what they recommended. And the main answer I got was teenage children cannot, if you're worried about your teenage boys especially being on things they're not supposed to be on, well, they can't differentiate. So either YouTube is good or YouTube is bad. Internet is good or internet is bad. It's very hard for them to differentiate at that age. So what I decided to do for myself, and this was not easy, is I got rid of my Safari app. I had other filters on, whatever, but I went cold turkey, no Safari. That's the little app with the Apple thing. So, and I just got rid of it. And I don't go on the internet. And because I'm not going on the internet, so then I'm able to tell my boys, hey, you know what? You're too young for the internet right now. When you get older, we use that famous 18 when you can drink, 18 you can do whatever. So when you're 18, we'll talk about it, right? But right now, you're too young. I'm not on it myself, and I'm more than 18. So you don't need to be on it. So then another thing we do at home is we do not allow any technology upstairs, right? We don't live in an apartment. We have a second floor. It's one of the bonuses of living in New Jersey. Easy parking spots, and you get more than one floor for less than several $1 million. So we don't allow technology upstairs for our children. Now, can you imagine if our children, we didn't allow technology. For us, we brought it upstairs. So, of course, they would see the hypocrisy. They would call us on it in a second, and they would not stand for it, especially if they were teenagers. So by us leading by example, we're really able to get a lot of messages across, and obviously having open communication. So I suggest for the parents that wrote this, make sure you're not playing Fortnite, So, if you're not playing Fortnite, there's a less of a chance. Make sure you're not on YouTube when you're not supposed to be. And then that's going to make it easier for your children. Okay, next question we have is, I love this question. Steve, we're going to assume this is true. Even if this is not true, we'll go with it. Steve Jobs said in an interview, the late Steve Jobs, said in an interview that he did not let his children use the iPad. Tech industry parents severely limit their children's use of technology. How can we also do that? We'll go to Rabbi Meirov.
I actually have a good friend in the audience here, Simcha Leiderman, that gave me a beautiful article a while back about Steve Jobs and his beliefs on technology. And the truth is, it's a tremendous musar. If these people that created it, who are involved with it, are holding themselves back from it, it's a tremendous chizuk for us.
It's like Michael Jordan not playing basketball.
But I will say one thing. I think Dr. Blumenthal mentioned a few times, it's here and it's here to stay. And it's very difficult for a family that's been addicted to it for 10 years and everyone has it, to suddenly say we're becoming Steve Jobs. It's not a davar pashut. So how do we deal with the current situation that's happening in 99% of the homes? Lamaisa, let's be realistic. These smartphones and all the technology is making life so much easier. Business is smoother, communication with your family all across the world. You could buy and sell with the click of a button. Life is definitely better because of it. Life is definitely easier because of it. But the quality of life is being affected tremendously. They mentioned earlier about going to restaurants, and it's very common that either both the husband and the wife, one of them is on the phone the whole time.
Right.
It's like the wife sneezes and the husband texts her, bless you. It's a major problem where it's overtaken us to the point where we're losing that connection, that face-to-face connection, that communication where you're looking eye to eye to each other. So lemaaseh, could we become Steve Jobs? Halavai we could. Halavai we could. But every single home has to have boundaries. You mentioned your home, it doesn't go past the first floor. Every home has to have rules. Breakfast, it can't be on the table. Or like Dr. Blumenthal said, maybe it should be on the table. When it rings and dings, you don't look at it. Teach your kids that you're much more important than whoever it is that's calling me right now. But you got to set boundaries. You got to make rules. It doesn't, past this time, no one's using it. If you don't finish your homework, you can't do that. Whatever the rules you want to make up, you know your home best. You got to make those rules and you got to implement it and you got to be the role model for that rule. It cannot be that during the dinner table, you're using the phone and you're telling your 17-year-old to put it away because your conversation is important, but he feels his is also important. So therefore, you got to have rules that are going to be kept by the husband, by the wife, by the children, in all circumstances, and we're going to abide by it, and we're going to do this as a team. When you do things as a team, it's much easier to B'ezras Hashem succeed. But if you're not doing it as a team, it's not going to work. I will add one point. I was about a year ago. I was at an event. There was a very, very wealthy Sephardic businessman who was sitting next to me over there, and he had one of the flip phones, and he's not a religious guy. And I asked him, Mr. So and so, is that yours? What is that? He's like, yeah, Rabbi, that's my phone. And I'm like, but Baruch Hashem, as far as I know, you have a very successful business. And Baruch Hashem, when he needs, he even has a helicopter taking him from places to place. And he says, you should know one thing. My wife and I don't have all those gadgets that you rabbis have. Because we realize how harmful it is to our families. It's a half of a fella. He's telling, how do you run a business like this? He says, don't worry about it. I have a computer, I have a laptop, I got to check my emails, I got to do transactions. But my house will never see that phone because I want to have quality time with my wife and kids. Half of a fella, similar to what you're saying about Steve Jobs. So obviously it could be done. If it's done by these quote-unquote great people in the industry, Kal v'chomer could be done by simple people like us. But the key is to have boundaries, and those boundaries are going to be kept to the T, B'ezras Hashem.
Right, definitely seems like the parents need to keep their boundaries as well. Okay, Dr. Blumenthal, if Steve Jobs, of the late Steve Jobs, and other tech industry parents do not allow their kids on technology, what are we doing? Why would we let our kids on technology?
Thank you.
Actually, Rabbi, your story reminded me of a story I heard. I was presenting in Chicago on this very topic, and the rabbi told me something he actually witnessed on a Thursday morning. A gabbai wanted to give somebody hatba, but the guy was on his phone, was texting on his phone. So the gabbai took out his phone and texted him hatba. The guy texted, for real? And he said, yeah, and he got him the hatba. So we have a new way of calling people up to the Torah now. A few comments, and I think that'll be right. First of all, I want to just comment, maybe hark back a little bit. There's a lot of ominous talk about teenagers, and if we don't set the rules before they're teens, once they're teenagers, they're out of control. I'll tell you something very interesting that we know from both research and I know from my own clinical practice. Teenagers also want to please their parents. Yes. Teenagers also want to listen to their parents. Now, you don't necessarily discipline them or set those limits the same way you would with a younger child. You don't, have the same kind of, if any, consequences. But if you, let's even say your child is one of these teens that's a lot of control and may not listen to you. And you should never say, I'm therefore not going to say anything, because the research shows even that if you say something to the child, even if you don't attach any consequences, but if you say, I don't approve of this, I don't approve of this game you're playing, I don't approve of the extent to which you're using the devices without even, let's say, shutting it down or punishing or taking it away from them, and they're going to roll their eyes, they're going to say, you're so old-fashioned, this isn't, when I was raising kids, they told me it wasn't the 60s, but, it isn't the 90s or something like that. They're hearing you and they'll listen to you. So let's not be so intimidated. One of the things that's happening because of technology is we're getting scared of our children. and we should not be scared of our children, but we have to discipline them the correct way. The other thing I want to mention, I think that may have some bearing on what was said about Steve Jobs. I'm going to suggest, Akiva, that you said you did that study a few years ago in the Carterpos High School. I think if you did the study today, it would be middle school.
I agree.
You have to understand that this is changing with such rapidity that if I see a study from 2015 about social media, the internet, I either ignore it or whatever they find, I just naturally up the numbers, if you will, because it's changing with such rapidity. And I think also, I don't know how long Steve Jobs is no longer with us. I wasn't at his Levaya, but you know, I'm wondering how realistic that would be today, because more and more so, it's becoming normative, and more so it's becoming an essential part of living. And maybe so for children as well. It's very more and more becoming part of our education. Today we are educating children in a more individual way. Many schools today have parts of the day where the children are not in classroom, but each on a computer working at his level. So my bias, which I think has been reflected already, more than, we have to say no sometimes, we do have to shut it down, and that's what a lot of these apps do. But more importantly, to teach him how to have it and be in control of it. I think that's a more important part of how we can train our children today.
Okay, so you're sticking with the teach them how to be in control of it scenario. Okay, fine. Very good. Ushitasa. Okay, next question. Now this question reminds me, this actually happened to me, so I'm going to just quickly say how my father dealt with it. I was so happy he did that later on. And then I want to see how, we're going to give this like a quick round, I think that's called lightning round, to all the panelists. I woke up in the middle of the night and found my 12-year-old son using the tablet. What would you do in this situation? Okay, so similar thing happened with moi when I was around 12, 13 years old. I believe it was a Commodore 64, but don't quote me on that. One of those, if anyone remembers. It was, and my father woke up in the middle of the night, and my father, literally, non-aggressive, doesn't get so angry. He saw me on the computer. He smashed the computer. And so that's how he dealt with it. And I would say, if I was to ask myself that question, I would 1,000,000% do that as well. And so that's my answer. And I'm sure some of the doctors have something to say about that. And let's start with the Rabbi. What do? You see your 12-year-old on whatever, the computer, he's not doing anything asur, chas v'shalom, but he's playing a video game or whatever in the middle of the night when he's supposed to be asleep.
No, Shlomo HaMelech says, Chosech shifto, soneh beno. If you withhold the stick, then you hate your child. And Rav Shlomo Wolbe, Alav Hashalom, asked, what kind of stick are we talking about? Should it be a metal stick, a wooden stick, a plastic stick? What stick are we talking about? What should you use? So he says every generation has a different stick. And our generation, it's more the lollipop stick. We got to take things in a softer approach. With that being said, I believe that we're living in a generation that's so complicated, so tough, and so difficult that sometimes if we react by smashing the computer or beating the kid up, chas v'shalom,
no, I didn't say beat the kid up.
He didn't beat you up? Okay, fine. But it might backfire in the year 2019-20. Because the kids are very sensitive and they have so many different outlets, and there's so many other things that they could chas v'shalom eventually do and make sure they hide it even better. We have to try to have an open line of communication. Let them know that we're not happy with what just happened and why you're up at 2 a.m. doing this. But you got to have a talk, a father to son talk, and see what's going on. Why did you wake up? What were you trying to do? Yeah, you got to have that communication with him. In fact, Le'anu Dati, what happens is anytime, God forbid, a child does something that's wrong, if you react aggressively, then they'll be too scared to tell you they did something wrong. They'll be too scared to tell you that someone approached them in school and said this to them, showed this to them, or wants them to go here or go there, because you don't know how to react properly. Whereas if your father's able to react or your mother's able to react by conversing with them and saying, listen, I know you have this challenge, what could we do together? Let me help you out. Then you know what, tomorrow when he has another challenge, he'll say, you know what, my dad gave me good advice last time. Let me sit down with him again. Whereas if the reaction is more aggressive, then he'll be too scared to approach you in the first place and tell you that he has his challenges popping up there. I actually always encourage, and I have to work on this myself as well, for a father and mother to have, serious talks with their kids when they're 4 or 5 years old. Know what's happening in school, who was fighting, what's happening on the bus, what's happening here. Oh, Abba, you won't believe what happened today. This kid did that, and this kid was screaming, and he was cursing, and the Mara got upset at him. Get them to talk to you and hear them out say, oh, that's so terrible, he did this, she did that. What happens is, when they're 5, and they're 6, and they're 7, and 8, 9, 10, they're talking to you. Now what happens is when they're 15, 16, they have some serious issues. They already know, I've been talking to this guy for the past 10 years. They're accustomed to talking to you and opening up to you. So definitely you have to have Lenu Dati, an approach. Obviously every kid, like Rutenberg mentioned before, you don't have one size fits all. Every situation has to be different. But I think that ultimately reacting with anger and aggression might actually backfire. Better off to think it over and find a nice time to talk it over with the child and see what's going on and see if you can come to a solution.
Okay, interesting. I would actually have a conversation after I smash the computer. Okay, next, Rabbi Rutenberg.
Definitely don't smash the computer. Rabbi Meirov said, I would just slightly add to that, but I would say a very similar idea. I think the most important thing, in my opinion, as a parent, is to be one of the first 5 people that your child talks to. Okay, if you can be one of the top 5 people that your child talks to when something's going on, or hopefully even the first in many situations, you're in good shape. And I really, really believe that relationship is so crucial. And very often it's in those trying moments that the children will see, or the teenagers will see, whether they can share with you or not. And if Rabbi Kigel gave an example where you saw the child on the computer and doing something, they should be sleeping this time. But what if you found them on the computer doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, watching something or looking at pornographic or some images that are really forbidden and wrong for them to see?
For sure, smash it.
So how do you deal with that situation? And I'll share with you something I heard from Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz, who's a friend of mine, our families. He said that back in Europe there were a lot of the younger generation at different times in history were sort of rebelling or going away from the Torah path. And there was a Hasidic man who came to his Rebbe and he said, Rebbe, my son is crazy. He's dancing with shiksas and he's eating chazar. And the Rebbe puts his hand around his shoulder and he says to him, he goes, your son is not crazy. He said, if he was dancing with the chazars and eating the shiksas, he'd be crazy. He said, your son is misguided. He needs guidance. He needs to know what's right, what's wrong. You have to help him. And I think that so much happens at that moment when you see the child doing something wrong, in being able to create that trust with the child that next time you'll be the one that they speak to. And very often it's about not making them feel like they're bad, but rather looking at the situation, judging the behavior, explaining that it is normal, but not healthy. And I really believe that relationship is key.
Right, really to feed off of what everyone else is saying, that you really don't want that to be your first discussion with a kid, where you catch them in the middle of the night doing something they probably shouldn't be doing. You don't want that to be the first. You want that to be a conversation that they already know your values, they already know what matters to you, and this way you could continue the conversation. I just want to feed off what Rabbi Rutenberg was saying. We ran a study on some of the more extreme behaviors online with boys and girls and looking at pornography and things like that. And we wanted to see what the kids were doing and what the parents thought the kids were doing. And what we discovered is that there was a large divide between what the kids were doing and what the parents actually believed them to do. And what I took from that was that meant that those kids or those parents never had a conversation with one another about some of the more challenging behaviors that take place online. And what that means is that a kid, when he's engaged, he or she is engaged in certain behaviors, that the most important people in their lives that they could communicate with, that could guide them and give them perspective, are not really being there. We ran one study and we asked the parents, do you think your children deliberately access pornography online? And then we asked the kids, do you deliberately access pornography online? And the boys, this was in seniors in high school, the boys were above 90%, and the girls were above 60% in the seniors. And again, we'd probably add to those numbers because it was a few years ago. And then we asked the parents, do you think your kids are doing this? And for the boys, it was like 20% of the parents thought they were, and for the girls, it was even lower than that. And what that demonstrated to me is that these kids never had a conversation with their parents about something that is very natural to development. There was no adult in the room. And we want to be the adults in the room. We want to be the ones that our kids could turn to and have a conversation with that's really hard to have. It's really challenging, but then they know that the adults could handle such things. And they're better off as a result of it.
So, two stories come to mind with this. First of all, in terms of smashing the computer, I have a friend who is an avid tennis player, and he told me that he had a match against someone. If you know tennis, you have to win by two, I forgot what it's called, but you have to have two kind of points, basically, to win. And they were back and forth, they were past, they cut this one won, and he won, and this one won, and this one went on, and finally he lost. And he took his fairly expensive tennis racket, because he is an avid tennis player, and he smashed it on the ground and broke it. And the opponent said, why did you break that tennis racket? He said, it's cheaper than therapy. So I guess it is cheaper to break the computer than to need therapy. The other story, by the way, I heard is a beautiful story, and I think it may talk to, and it talks to disciplining children in general. It's a story I heard from another friend of mine who's from a very yeshivish community, and a type of community where they don't routinely go to ball games. I mean, I took my kids to ball games, but in this community they don't. And I don't want to say specifically because I don't know if the parties want to know who they are, but they're very close to a very chashuv Rosh Yeshiva, well-known Rosh Yeshiva. And one time when his son was a teenager, he asked his father if he has an opportunity to go to a Yankee game. Could he go to the Yankee game on Chol Hamoed? He had an opportunity to go to the Yankee game. So he said, let's ask the Rosh Yeshiva. So they're standing on line Friday night, they say good job, and they come to Rosh Yeshiva. He says to Rosh Yeshiva, I have an opportunity to go to a Yankee game. I'd like to go to a Yankee game this Chol Hamoed. And Rosh Yeshiva said to him, how would you feel if you saw me at a Yankee game? And he started laughing. And he said, what's funny? He said, you're chashuv. And Rosh Yeshiva said, so are you. I'm not sure. I think there are ways to make someone feel important and still set limits. I always tell parents, Baruch Hashem, your kids misbehave. Because when they misbehave, you give us an opportunity to teach them. Children from very abusive homes who are afraid to misbehave never learn how to control themselves because they never have opportunities to misbehave. So when you catch your kid in the middle of the night on the game, when you catch your kid doing something wrong, first of all, be very grateful to Hashem that you did, because now is an opportunity to educate them. And do it in a fashion that doesn't degrade them, but makes them feel good about themselves.
Beautiful. Thank you for your answers, and I hope you appreciate mine. Okay, next, this question is really, for me, like hits a sore point. It's almost like heartbreaking. So, if a parent, really wants to monitor their kids' technology, especially when they're younger, like before they even get into high school, and they have their own filters on, and they don't even watch technology so much themselves. So now, but the child is made fun of in school for not having a smartphone, but rather he has one of these kosher phones. What should the parents do if the kid's being made fun of in school? He's coming back, he's saying, everyone, I'm the only one in the whole school without the smartphone, and like he really means it. A lot of times, by the way, when kids say people are doing this, that means one or two people in their class. People means one or two. Everyone's doing it means up to 10, okay? Everyone's not doing anything, right? So but here, in this situation, that everyone in the school, everyone in the school has a smartphone, and you're setting your kid that you're trying to be a good parent, trying to put the right filters on everything else with one of these dumb phones, as we like to call them in my house. And the kid's getting made fun of. What should you do as a parent? Let's start with the man with the most soothing voice, Dr. Perlman. That was me.
To be honest, I'm not sure everyone's going to like this answer, but if you send your kid to a school where everyone has a smartphone and your kid doesn't, you should buy them one. That's my personal belief. It's a bias of mine. You shouldn't send your kid into a situation where they stand out as being one can't join the rest. And if you really have a belief that my kids shouldn't have a smartphone, consider sending them to a different school. But you don't send a kid into an environment where they're destined to fail. So really explore that environment and know in advance what takes place there and make sure you're comfortable with it. But in this instance, to answer the question, I'd buy the kid a smartphone and educate them like we've been speaking about all night.
Okay. Meirov, what would you do in this situation? I'm sure you've heard these type of questions before.
The truth is, going along the lines of what he was saying, maybe I wouldn't give him the smartphone, but I'll change the school at least, if that's my value system. If that's not my value system, I'll give him the smartphone, exactly. You can't put your child in a situation where everyone has chocolate and you're telling him you can't have the chocolate.
Right.
You know, here's a bread with stale bread. You can't do that to him. So you gotta understand that your child is a human being. If you're putting him in a school where everyone has it, and that's the parent body, that's the student body, then you gotta be fair to that child and let him survive in that environment. And if you feel that environment is not the right environment for him, then maybe that school is not the option for your family, and maybe you should find a different school for this circumstance.
Okay, excellent. And Rabbi Rutenberg.
So let's take the case where maybe half the class has and half doesn't, because or the cool kids, which your son considers himself one of the cool kids, all have it, but most of the class doesn't have it. And here's where it gets a lot trickier, because it's not necessarily the wrong school for your kid, but you may have a value that says your child shouldn't have this phone. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I do believe that if you have the right relationship with your kids, like we all know in relationships, like a piggy bank, right? So if you have that relationship and the kid knows that you respect him and that you have given that child opportunities to do things within reason, so let's say, for example, a child wants to watch a movie, and you look into the movie and you say, okay, this is okay for this child to watch, and the child doesn't feel restricted, because I think that's a crucial point. If a child is going to feel restricted, they will try to break away from it. And if we don't think they're breaking away from it, very often they're breaking away from it. I would almost say that if you're not getting into battles with your kids about technology and you have a restrictive approach, chances are they found a way out around you, and that's why you don't know what they're doing, okay? One of my sons told me that in a dollar store, he goes to school in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, in a dollar store nearby, you can buy a smartphone for $9, okay? A smartphone for $9, you take it, Wi-Fi in it, and you go to any Wi-Fi place, and that child can watch whenever they want. If you don't have that communication, like we said before, you're doomed. So there is going to be tension in this area, like Dr. Perlman said before. There's going to be tension, and I think that if you have that communication with the child and you say, I really care about you and I really want the best for you, I think it really goes a long way. And I'll tell you something which is even a little bit more complicated than the question in the class. What if you have multiple children, which many of us have, and for whatever reason you decided that the 17-year-old should have a cell phone when they were in 9th grade, you made that decision, and maybe you regretted it a year later, and now when the next kid is in 9th grade, you really don't want that kid to have a cell phone, and what do you do? That's, you know, and again, I'm going to stick with the same answer, that you lovingly have a conversation about it. Sometimes it helps just to like push off the conversation. You know, this is a great topic. Let's discuss it next week. Let's discuss it again, like when you come back from yeshiva next time. Like, it's such an important topic. We have to think about it more. But I think that realizing this is a very, very important topic, but at the same time, how to deal with it.
All right. Okay, we have another couple's question. So it has been known by rabbis, therapists, and social workers everywhere that the top 2 reasons what causes marital strife is in-laws and money. Okay, has technology made it into that group as far as you know? Let's start with Dr. Blumenthal. Can we say that now? It's not just the mother-in-law and finances.
Okay. Interesting thing about finances is that finances are known to be reasons for marital strife, but not of high cost for divorces. partly because if you're having money problems, you can't afford a divorce. But no, really seriously, it's not really, that's an interesting thing about it. The other thing that we have to keep in mind as well is in some areas, the Orthodox Jewish community is very different than the general community, especially in areas of marriage, because
Do you talk with non-Orthodox people as well?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do, but don't tell anybody. No. But there is definitely, and I've surveyed this informally, not formally, but and in fact I even had to present on this at a major convention. The main cause for interesting thing is that in the secular community, the rates of divorce are very low for early marriages. Now, many people are not getting married. There's a basic rule that you have to get married before you get divorced. But there's a very low rate. Those young people who are getting married have very low rates of divorce, and the Orthodox Jewish community is one of the highest rates, is in the first year or two of marriage. We have a feeling, not that most marriages, but it's still a small percentage, but it is a very high percentage of divorces, and most of those divorces are as a result of some sort of sexual issue or sexual dysfunction, a large percentage of which can be linked to pornography addictions, etc., that have been bred online. So, is it mothers-in-laws and money, and etc.? I think it's safe to say, in fact, the sense we have today, and we've been focusing on this, that the relatively, again, I'm saying relatively high rate of early divorce, in other words, in the first year or two of marriage, in the Orthodox Jewish community, probably the most common root cause is some sort of sexual dysfunction. Second most common cause is some disguised or hidden mental illness that didn't come out till later, and both of which speaks volumes in terms of consequences.
Okay, so you feel it's up there. Dr. Perlman.
I absolutely agree. When it comes to, I don't work so much with couples, but I've read the data. And when it comes to certainly the frum community, I do see those cases, they come my way when it comes to sexual dysfunction. And speaking with other couples therapists, they keep reporting one after the next that the number one cause on their end is some form of sexual dysfunction, and you can't ignore the fact that...
And that's linked to technology, the dysfunction?
Well, yeah, the early access, the pathway to some form of sexual dysfunction almost always begins with early use of pornography and,
Wow.
and trauma, which we don't want to forget about as well.
Right, right. All right. Is technology something that you feel causes couples strife from the couples you meet with?
I don't think it causes strife. I mean, it definitely causes some strife, but I think what I see very often when I do couples work is that they use technology as a sort of escape from dealing with their issues. So what happens is you'll have a couple that they're really not getting along. They're upset with each other, but they won't even fight. They'll just like, one spouse will get into this custom of going upstairs and going on Facebook, other spouse will go to sleep early, and they'll use technology as really as an escape from facing their real problems. And then what happens is the problems just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's where I would say that technology, I think, probably does trump maybe even the in-laws and I personally have the belief we actually have a panel like this every year, Shalom Bayis panel, and I personally have the belief that in-laws rarely are the cause of the problems. Okay, so they're usually there's another core problem, and then the in-laws sort of like
make it worse,
exacerbate the problem. But rarely they're the cause of the problem. But I think technology, as well, in a certain sense, is not really necessarily the cause of the problems, but can be used as an escape from not dealing with the problem. So picture a couple in 1975 or 1995, before they had smartphones, and they're not communicating with each other, so it would be obvious that there's a problem. But when you live in a society where nobody communicates with anyone else, so maybe there isn't a problem, maybe it's just normal. So I would just say one suggestion about how to deal with this. I think that I always try to see the positive in every situation. So I think that, sort of like what Dr. Blumenthal said about keeping the phone on and not looking at it, I think that today we have an opportunity to use sort of our cell phone addiction, so to speak, as a way of, by limiting the cell phone addiction, we're showing our spouse how important they are to us. And we're actually, in even just a small amount, like if your spouse is used to you looking at your phone all the time when you speak to them, and you go 15 minutes a night without looking at your phone, that's going to feel like gold to your spouse. And I think this is an important idea in relationships in general. We know that it's not about the quantity, it's about the effort, it's about the quality and the effort that's more important. And I think that this is sort of a healthy, positive approach to deal with this, is that if you know you have a problem, chances are your spouse knows you have a problem. They probably knew you had a problem before you knew you had a problem. And if you can even take a small effort, and I really mean small, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes a night, and then build it up from there, it really can make a difference.
Okay, the time, it seems like it's early because I think the time changed or something. I know, like, Shabbos started, it was 4 p.m., it's like time for Shabbos. Yeah, this is a rough week, but the time is, if you can believe it, actually getting late. And so we're gonna have our last question / piece of advice from the panel and the moderator. And the question is, what is your best practice piece of advice for limiting technological use at home, whether it's for couples or for children or whatever? So I'd say one of the things that we've been successful with in our house, and like we've given over to a lot of the couples that we work with as well, is something called a 1 week fast, FAST, like a Zoom, like a fast from something for a week. So for example, if someone feels like the other spouse is on Facebook too much, or on the phone too much, or whatever it is, just say, you know what, take a 1 week fast from it and see how you survive. Usually everyone lives to tell about it, and it really improves the relationship. So that's my best practice, is take a 1 week fast from any technology that you think is getting in the way of you having the life that you want. Rabbi Meirov, best practices for limiting technology, besides smashing.
I have a good friend of mine, Danny Gadayev, sitting here at the audience. He actually runs Chazaq's after-school programs for children. And recently he made a dip and paint night for ladies, and I want to share a very small point I shared with the ladies that night. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a human being. We make mistakes. We could paint, we make mistakes. We drive, we get into an accident, Chaz v'shalom. We make mistakes in life. But God can't make mistakes. Hashem is perfect. That's so tamim ba'olo. So how is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when He created man and woman, the first, creation of a couple in history, they were created as a one, and then He decided to separate them and make them into two separate human beings. What He regretted His original creation of having them one, and He made them separately afterwards. So I saw a beautiful article on this Indian. The Rabbi Grilak from Mishpacha brought down that he once interviewed two girls, I believe they're like 13 or 14 years old, that were Siamese twins. And Hashem Yishmor, the doctor said they couldn't get separated, it was too much of a risk. So they had to live like this for the rest of their lives. And he asked them, they were asked, like, what are the benefits and what are the negatives of being in such a situation, such a lifestyle? So they said, listen, the negative is we're always together, the positive is we're always together, we're never alone, we're never lonely. Baruch Hashem, we always have company. But the negative is that, when she wants to go to sleep, I want to play ball, there's nothing we can do about it. She wants to go here, I want to go there. She wants this, I want that. It's a major problem. So he asked him, so what did you do? What was your solution for this problem? He said, listen, we came to a compromise. That one time we do what she wants, one time we do what I want, and you learn to live with it. This is our form of communication, understanding with whatever, situation Hashem put us in this world. So the reason why Hashem created us back to back as one originally, and then separated us, is to tell us that we should have this mindset of, your Siamese twins. You and your wife are really one. It would be too difficult to live like this. Hashem separated us, but that should be your mindset. That when you want to go here and she wants to go there, you got to find a way to compromise. You guys want to do this, but she doesn't like it, you got to find a way to compromise. You got to find a way to get to some common ground. So if there's one way of making a takana in your home with technology, it's not communicating issues and machloket through a phone. One of the biggest problems is that you get angry at her or she gets angry at you, and during the daytime you're at work and you're texting him and you're texting her and she's texting him, and you many times you don't really know what they mean. Was that an aggressive statement? Was it being soft? Maybe it didn't come out the way it should come out. So what takana you can make, one thing everyone should do is, Hashem created us a certain fashion, communicate, talk to each other, try to work things out, not via technology, but via direct confrontation and discussions over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, whatever it may be. That should be something everyone should really implement in the homes.
Right.
Because if it's done through the phone many times, it does not lead to the proper ending that you want.
Okay, so no text fights. I like that. Okay.
First of all, I want to give a special Yashar Koach, Chazaq U'Baruch to everyone who came out tonight. As Dr. Perlman mentioned to me at the beginning of the evening, he said, this is a topic that's very hard to get people to come out for, because nobody realizes, nobody wants to accept that this is their problem. So, Chazaq U'Baruch all of you for coming out and listening and hearing. And I benefited definitely greatly from hearing Dr. Blumenthal, Dr. Perlman, or Meirov, Rabbi Akiva. I would just end with saying that, we embrace the fact that this is a very, very challenging topic, and it's something we have to work on ourselves. When I think about, we didn't touch on this tonight, but using our cell phones when we drive, right? And how many of us have found ourselves in situations where we get so close after getting to an accident by looking at our phone, by even doing something that maybe is not officially illegal. Because a lot of the phones now have these like screens, like the smart car screens, and like your text messages show up on the screen. Like, who thought of that? Like, what was that? What was the thought process behind that? But so there's all this distraction, and then we have our kids starting to drive, and then our kids are going to watch our behavior, and how does that interact, and how does that affect them? So I really believe that if we can try to set limits to these things, if we can try to let's say, not turn on your phone till 9:30 in the morning. Not the first thing you do in the day is turn on your phone, or go to shul first before you have your phone on, or set limits, and then try to be a good role model for our kids. I think that's a great step in the right direction.
Okay.
A student of mine mentioned to me that he works in a bank, and one of his clients is a very, very wealthy person. He was reaching out to him during, I think it was like a Saras Yemei Tshuva, and it was like about 10:30, and it was a Sephardic man who told the student of mine, and he said, I don't take my cell phone to shul, and he said for the last 20 years I've been taking my cell phone to shul, and he was in a shul that had a very long slichos, and he said that he manages apartments, and he said that 20 years ago he managed 200 apartments. And he would constantly be distracted by like a bathtub broke, and this happened, and that happened, and he could barely ever daven with any kavanah. And then he made a decision, he made an agreement with Hashem that he's not going to take his phone into shul. And he said at this point he owns, I think, something like 20,000 apartments. He's very, very successful. And he said whatever problem happened usually is resolved, or something else, he's able to fix the problem. So I think, like Dr. Blumenthal said, a lot of the things that we feel that urgency to go to our phones, very, very often we realize once we get to it, it's not really so urgent. I heard some very good advice once from Dr. Pelkowitz, and his advice was, he said, whenever you get a text message, try not to respond. If I remember correctly what he said, try not to respond within 10 minutes, okay? And I don't promise that I keep that advice, but the concept I think behind this advice is that then we create an environment where people around us are not expecting that instant response. And it trains ourselves to know that we don't have to give an instant response. And I think a lot of like the tension that gets created around the cell phones, and like that sort of feeling of like, I have to respond, I need to respond, and all this kind of stuff. When somebody calls us, they don't expect a response immediately. But with a text message or WhatsApp, again, there's a tremendous power to these items, but it also has that impact. And lastly, I think we have to think about, is it a means or is it an end? And technology has to be seen as a means, not an end. We know this is true about money as well. Is it a means or an end? And Dr. Blumenthal mentioned about the Dora Flaga, and Rav Hirsch has a beautiful idea of it. I recommend everyone look at it. One of the things he says on the pasuk Chomer and Chemer, do you see that part where he says that they confuse Chomer and Chemer? They confuse the means and the end. What was used to be a means, now that became an end. It used to be the clay was in between the stones. Now the clay became the stones. And he says metaphorically, there's also the concept of a means and an end. They confuse the means for the end. And we have to keep in mind that technology has to be used to further our relationships, to connect us with each other, to connect us with Hashem, connect us in anything. But if it becomes the end itself, if we become the slaves to our cell phones, we're in big trouble. And unfortunately, many of us have become.
I think Dr. Blumenthal mentioned before that the three elements that bring us to happiness, a greater sense of satisfaction in our life, all of those elements require a lot of work. They require us being engaged in our life, taking stock, and asking ourselves, how are we doing today? And I think for me, the greatest advice I could try to embrace for myself and for all of us is to remain engaged in this topic. In one way or another, remain engaged. And if that means setting a reminder on your phone to say, how are we doing? How am I doing? How are we doing as a family? How am I doing as a human being? How am I doing as a couple? And if we could take stock every once in a while, because we all know when we're living well. And we all know how it feels to live well, and it feels to live connected. And that's what we're striving for, but it all requires work. Everything that feels good ultimately requires work. And this is no different than anything else. So to me, just take stock and make sure you set up in a way that you're continually going back to ask yourself that same question. And hopefully we'll continue to grow in this arena.
Being the last person, we're left with very little to add. I'm reminded of the story they tell about Rabbi Lookstein, who was a great orator, who once went to an out-of-town community and gave one of his masterful speeches. And afterwards, the young rabbi came to him and said, Rabbi Lookstein, that was a beautiful speech. I wish I had given it. And he said, you will. So there's not much more I can add. I'm actually, my parting words, I'm reminded very much of the line in Alice in Wonderland, that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. When you're disciplining children, or you're raising children, or you're trying to shape them, sometimes you have to stop and think ahead. What kind of adults do you want them to be? And what kind of world will be the world in which they're going to live? Because the world is changing so rapidly. So when you make these decisions, that's what my advice to you would be. If you're not sure, move the clock ahead. Picture them 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What is the world they're going to live in? And how do you want them to, what kind of presence you want to have in that world? And then you'll know what position to take. Thank you again.